this may be the largest social movement in the history of the United States.
The Centers for Disease Control declared last week that racism is a serious public health threat in America.
This is a pandemic. It's a pandemic of hate. It's a pandemic of repression. It's a pandemic that seeks to infect American democracy.
We will be preparing resources for the field, reaffirming the JCPA's resolve, strengthening relationships with Black leaders, and creating an important new role for Jews of color within the JCPA network and as leaders within this important work on racial justice, both at the national and local levels.
JCPA is developing a racial justice platform that will help us align with these agencies' priorities, enable us to partner on those issues in order to lessen racial disparities in our country.
You guys are from cities and states all over the country, and as much as we gather together to have that fight focused on Capitol Hill, the White House, and the various government agencies, whether it is legislation or regulation, we know that fight also has to happen at the state level. So making sure that we can come together in this federalist society and see to it that these particular pieces are put together at the ground, the policies of policing, the policies of economics, the policies of education, and so much more are fights we're going to have at both places.
And so for us, the way we address hate and bias, and you all know this well, right? You work on these issues and you have for years, is really not necessarily about prosecution, although that's one tool, but we actually have to reshape how we think about race in America. And we've never had a reckoning in this country with respect to truth telling and reconciliation, or, sort of reformation or restorative justice.
CRT is mostly taught in graduate school and law school, in some cases undergrad, but it is not a curriculum. It's not a teaching methodology. It's generally not taught in K-12 schools. It's an attempt to restrict or prevent teachers from teaching about racism, sexism, and other forms of systemic oppression.
No one who is pushing critical race theory is to say to take anything from anybody. What they're saying is include and acknowledge my truth and my reality. Why do I have to convince people that me as a person of color, that I experience things different? Why is that something that, but we understand that's grounded in privilege. Because again, we live in typically a white-centric environment, and so folks of color, marginalized, gender, all those identities have to convince those in power that their voices and their experiences are real.
And you're talking about African-American Jewish relationships and that coalition that's been formed. As a multiracial Jewish community, we dedicated this conference to set strategies for achieving racial justice in America. And last night, we watched a movie and heard Ambassador Andrew Young and Sherry Frank, and you were in the movie as well, speak from Atlanta about revitalizing the African-American Jewish Alliance.
Please hear me, my sisters and brothers, everybody listening to this and connected to this conference. There's no more important moral work than we can be doing right in this moment than defending the right to vote.
JCPA and its member organizations wanted to understand how best to engage in the work of racial justice, especially after all of the events of last summer. To that end, our task force was established and has learned with experts, proposed recommendations for the JCPA board for our own work on racial equity and justice, disseminated guidelines for collaboration, and produced an anti-racism toolkit.
I have found also that bringing the community along in these conversations, you can start doing that really well by outlining what the problems are locally in your community and showing them to people in black and white. You can't really work on any of these issues or contribute on any of these issues unless you're talking to these people that are working on them. And when I say these people, I mean these grassroots organizers and grassroots leaders are overjoyed to work with legacy organizations.
What could racial equity in the Jewish communal in Jewish communal life look like, and how do we get there? And I appreciate that the title focuses on the in Jewish communal life part, because I think that the topic of race and racial justice, topics of Jews of color, topics of how we as an organized Jewish community respond or act and take action in these moments, often, like, I don't know about my co-panelists here, but I would say that, often the conversation feels like it might be an us, them kind of conversation, and not necessarily a we conversation.
It seems like things, are hopeless, but then there are also opportunities such as conversations like this where I do see potential for change, and I feel inspired and motivated.